Kale lived alone at the edge of a vast forest on a quiet planet. His hut was small, made of smooth wood and reinforced with metal he had found in the forest. He liked it that way, simple, peaceful, and far from the noise of cities. He spent his days studying plants, listening to the wind, and sometimes talking to small creatures that wandered near his hut. Life was quiet, but Kale liked it that way. He had learned to enjoy small things: the sound of leaves rustling, the smell of rain, the way sunlight danced through the trees. One evening the sky darkened quickly. Clouds swirled above, unusual for this season. Kale felt the air change. It smelled of wet earth and electricity. Soon a storm arrived, harder than any he had ever seen. Rain poured in sheets and lightning split the sky. Kale hurried to secure his hut, locking the small door and checking the windows. He had everything ready, or so he thought. A sudden knock echoed through the hut. Kale froze. Visitors were rare here. In fact, he had not seen another living being near his hut for months. Another knock, louder this time, followed. Kale hesitated but opened the door carefully. Standing outside, drenched from the storm, was a group of figures unlike anything he had ever seen. There were 5 of them, all tall and strong, wearing sleek armor that glimmered even in the dim light. Their skin was not human, it shone faintly in colors Kale could not name. Their eyes were sharp and bright, and they moved with a grace he had only seen in wild animals. One of them stepped forward, her voice calm but commanding. "We seek shelter from the storm," she said. Her words were simple, but the tone carried authority. Kale nodded, stepping aside. "Of course. Come in." The huntresses entered silently, water dripping from their armor. Kale led them to a small table where he had prepared warm tea. He did not know what they wanted beyond safety, but he offered what he could. The huntresses sat carefully, eyes scanning the hut as if they were reading every detail. Kale felt a strange mix of nervousness and curiosity. These were not ordinary travelers. Their presence felt intense, almost alive, as if they could sense everything about him. He handed them cups of steaming tea. One of the huntresses, the one who had spoken first, took the cup and nodded slightly. She was shorter than the others, but her eyes seemed sharper. She glanced at Kale, and a soft whisper barely audible reached his ears. "I saw him first." Kale blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. The words were strange, almost playful, yet they carried a meaning he could not understand. He smiled awkwardly and said, "I am Kale. You can rest here until the storm passes." The huntresses did not answer at first. They seemed to be studying him, watching his every move. Kale poured himself a cup of tea and sat down. The silence was not uncomfortable, but heavy with tension. Slowly, one of the taller huntresses leaned forward. "You live alone here?" she asked, her voice softer than before. Kale nodded. "Yes. I like peace and quiet. This forest is full of life and I enjoy watching it." Another huntress, with skin that shimmered faintly blue, looked at him curiously. "You are human?" she asked, though the words sounded almost strange in his ears. Kale smiled. "Yes. One of the few left on this planet. I study plants, animals, and the weather. That is my life here." The huntresses exchanged quiet glances. Kale noticed that the shortest one, the one who whispered earlier, kept looking at him more than the others. Her eyes were different, softer yet still sharp and intelligent. She seemed fascinated by him, almost as if she could see something deeper. Kale did not know what it meant, but he felt a strange sense of calm. The storm outside grew stronger, but inside the hut, the atmosphere was different. It was not fear or hostility, it was curiosity. The huntresses were skilled, Kale could tell. He had seen warriors in stories, but they moved differently, silently, with a grace and confidence that humans rarely had. Yet they had entered his hut politely, without weapons drawn, showing trust in a way he did not expect. Hours passed. Kale shared what little food he had, and the huntresses accepted it with quiet manners. Occasionally one would glance at another and smile, a private joke perhaps. Kale realized that they were not only travelers, they were a pack. They worked together, moved together, and even in silence, communicated in ways he could not understand. He learned small things about them. They had traveled far to study unknown lands, they respected skill and knowledge, and they valued patience and careful thought. Kale explained his work with the plants, showing them his notes and small inventions. The huntresses seemed impressed, nodding and whispering among themselves. The shortest one, Lyra, kept asking questions, her voice soft but curious. Kale could see her interest was genuine, not just polite. As night fell, the storm continued, but the hut felt warm. Kale realized something remarkable. Despite their strength, these alien hunters were not dangerous to him. They were curious, intelligent, and perhaps even kind in their own way. The whispered words from earlier echoed in his mind. I saw him first. He did not fully understand them, but he felt a spark of connection, a bond forming even in the middle of a storm. By the time the rain slowed, Cale felt a quiet satisfaction. The unexpected guests had brought excitement and mystery into his simple life. For the first time in months, he felt less alone, even if he did not yet know what tomorrow would bring. Outside, the forest was dark and wet, but inside the hut, a small warmth lingered, one that came from trust, curiosity, and the beginning of an unusual friendship. The storm had slowed to a gentle drizzle, and the forest outside was wet and quiet. Cale moved around his hut, tidying up small things while the huntresses rested. They did not speak much, but their eyes followed him wherever he went. Cale felt their curiosity like a gentle pressure, as if they wanted to understand him completely. He had never experienced this kind of attention before, especially from beings so skilled and powerful. Lyra, the shortest huntress who had whispered earlier, was the first to speak. You live simply, yet you have made this place strong, she said, pointing to the small hut. Her words were soft, almost like a question rather than a statement. Cale smiled. It is enough for me. I have plants, tools, and a roof over my head. I like it quiet. Lyra nodded slowly, her eyes bright. Quiet, yet you know much, she added. Cale was surprised. She had noticed his work without him saying much. He set down a small notebook filled with sketches of plants and tiny machines he had made. I study these, he explained. Some are useful. Some are beautiful. I watch and learn from them. The huntresses leaned closer, their interest clear. Lyra touched a page carefully as if she might break it by accident. Her movements were careful, precise, yet gentle. Cale realized that though they were hunters, they appreciated knowledge as much as skill. The other huntresses began to ask small questions. One asked about the forest and the animals. Another asked how Cale survived alone. Cale answered each with patience. He told them how he grew plants that could heal small injuries, how he collected rainwater, and how he observed the creatures without disturbing them. The huntresses listened quietly, impressed by the simplicity and care in his methods. Cale felt proud but not boastful. He knew that in their eyes he was small, yet his mind seemed to earn respect. Lyra asked more than the others. Do you not fear being alone? She asked. Cale looked at her and smiled. Sometimes. But I like the quiet. Lets me think. It lets me see things others do not notice. Being alone is not always bad. Lyra's eyes softened. You see more than most. That is rare, she said. Her words made Cale feel strange, a warm feeling he had not felt in a long time. The other huntresses watched the exchange quietly, their expressions unreadable but respectful. Cale showed them more of his tools and experiments. Small plants glowed faintly in containers, and some seeds moved slowly, responding to light. The huntresses touched them carefully, fascinated by the subtle movements and strange colors. Cale explained how each plant reacted to the environment. He spoke simply, using easy words, but the knowledge behind them impressed the alien visitors. He realized that knowledge, curiosity, and patience were universal languages. Even powerful hunters could appreciate the quiet work of a human. As the night grew darker, Cale lit a small lamp in the center of the hut. The glow made the huntress's armor shine in soft colors. Lyra leaned forward again, her voice soft. You are brave, human, she said. Cale laughed quietly. Brave? I do not fight. I just live. Living is not always easy, but it teaches you much. Lyra smiled faintly, clearly thinking about his words. Cale noticed she looked at him differently from the others, more attentive, more curious, and somehow gentler. The storm had left the forest damp and fresh, and outside the windows, small creatures emerged. Cale pointed them out to the huntresses, explaining how they survived the rain. The huntresses watched carefully, even bending closer to see without touching. Cale realized they were learning from him, but also appreciating the small beauty of the world around them. It was not the skills of battle that mattered now, but the ability to see, understand, and respect life. The quiet bond grew stronger. The huntresses shared small stories of their travels, though Cale did not understand all of them. They spoke of mountains, rivers, and distant cities. Cale told them about his small world, his routines, and the creatures he cared for. Slowly the tension faded. They were no longer strangers. They were guests who had come to understand a human, and he was beginning to understand them. Lyra whispered again, softly, almost to herself, I saw him first. This time Cale understood. It was not about claiming him or ownership. It was about noticing him, recognizing that he was different, that he mattered. The words were simple, yet they carried warmth and respect. Kale felt a strange pride, not of power but of being appreciated for who he truly was. Hours passed quietly. Kale prepared simple food and the huntresses ate politely. They asked him questions about simple things, how he cooked, how he kept the hut warm, and how he survived alone. Kale explained everything carefully, showing patience and kindness. The huntresses learned not because he forced them but because he shared freely. And Kale learned that even powerful beings could respect a human who lived with curiosity and care. As the night deepened, Kale realized that this storm had brought more than rain. It had brought connection. A bond had formed between him and the huntresses, not of strength, not of fear, but of curiosity, respect, and understanding. He did not know what would happen tomorrow, but he felt ready. The human mind, the ability to see, to care, and to learn, had earned its place here even among the hunters. And as the huntresses settled quietly to rest, Kale looked at Lyra, who smiled softly at him. The whispered words lingered in his mind, "I saw him first." He understood now that being seen mattered, that knowledge and patience could make a human extraordinary in a galaxy full of powerful beings. For the first time in his life, Kale felt that his quiet ways had touched hearts beyond his own species. And in that simple hut, the beginnings of a remarkable connection had begun. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the forest fresh and sparkling under a pale moon. The huntresses stirred from their rest, stretching and moving quietly around Kale's small hut. Kale watched them, fascinated. They were careful, graceful, and always aware of their surroundings. Even in a calm moment, their presence carried power and skill. Kale felt small, yet strangely comfortable among them. Lyra, as usual, stayed closest to him. Her eyes followed his every movement, curious and sharp. She asked simple questions about his plants, his routines, and the small inventions he had created. Kale answered patiently, showing her how each plant reacted to light and water. Lyra listened intently, nodding occasionally, and asking questions that showed she understood more than she let on. The other huntresses were quiet at first, observing Kale and Lyra. Then one of them, taller and stronger, stepped forward. "You are clever," she said, her voice firm. "But cleverness is not all that matters. We need to see how you act when tested." Kale looked at her in surprise. "Tested?" he asked. "I'm not sure I understand." The huntress smiled faintly. "It is simple. We watch. We ask. We see how you respond." She gestured to the room. "Every action matters. Patience, honesty, courage, these are your tests." Kale nodded slowly. He did not feel fear, only curiosity. He understood that these beings were not trying to harm him. They wanted to know who he truly was. The huntresses began with small challenges. One asked Kale to describe each plant he had studied. He explained their uses, their reactions to water, light, and temperature. He spoke carefully, making sure he was accurate. The huntresses listened quietly, occasionally exchanging glances. Lyra leaned closer to see the small details of his notes, her eyes bright with interest. Kale realized that the tests were not difficult. They were about truth, patience, and attention. Next, the huntresses asked Kale to prepare a small meal. They watched as he carefully cooked simple food, explaining each step. Kale noticed that they were not just judging the result. They were observing his calmness, his care, and his ability to share without pride. When the food was ready, the huntresses tasted it quietly. Lyra smiled faintly and nodded, a small gesture that filled Kale with quiet pride. The whispered words from before, "I saw him first," came to his mind again, now carrying a sense of respect rather than playfulness. The storm outside had left the forest full of sounds, the drip of water from leaves, the rustle of small animals, and the distant call of nocturnal birds. Kale suggested a walk and the huntresses agreed. They moved silently through the wet forest, Kale noticing details that he had never seen before. Lyra stayed close, asking questions about tracks in the mud and the plants along the path. Kale explained each observation patiently and she listened carefully, clearly impressed. Suddenly, Kale noticed a small creature caught in the undergrowth. It was struggling, unable to free itself. Without thinking, Kale stepped forward and gently lifted the creature, showing it to the huntresses. "It needs help," he said. "It is small and weak, but it deserves care." The huntresses watched silently. Kale carefully set the creature in a safe place and checked it for injury. Lyra's eyes softened as she observed him. She whispered, barely audible, "You care for all things, even the small and weak." One of the huntresses finally spoke. "This is the true test," she said. "Not strength, not skill, but character. You are judged by how you act when no one commands you, when you see something that needs care." Kale felt a warmth in his chest. He realized that this was why the huntresses had come to him, not for power or possessions, but to understand the heart of a human. The group continued their walk, and Kale noticed how the huntresses began to relax around him. They shared small stories, laughed quietly, and even asked him for advice. Lyra in particular stayed close, her attention gentle but constant. Kale found himself sharing more than he usually did, explaining how he felt when he worked alone, how he studied the forest, and how he found joy in small discoveries. By the time they returned to the hut, the moon was high, casting silver light on the wet leaves. The huntresses moved with quiet elegance, placing themselves around the hut as if guarding it, yet showing respect rather than dominance. Kale realized that they had accepted him, not as a human to be tested or conquered, but as someone worthy of trust and attention. Lyra approached him once more. "You have patience," she said softly. "You see clearly. You act with care. That is rare." Kale smiled. "I do what I can," he replied. "I do not seek praise, only understanding." Lyra nodded, her eyes reflecting something deeper than curiosity. Kale felt that connection, a quiet bond forming that did not need words to be understood. As the night deepened, Kale and the huntresses returned to the hut. They settled quietly, sharing small food and soft conversation. Kale understood that the tests had ended, not with a declaration but with trust. They had seen his character and they respected it. Lyra's whispered words echoed again, "I saw him first." This time Kale understood completely. It was a recognition of his mind, his heart, and his strength in living as he did. That night, Kale felt a calm satisfaction. The huntresses were no longer strangers. They were allies, curious and powerful, who had learned from him as much as he had learned from them. The simple human, alone in a quiet hut, had passed their unspoken test, not with force but with patience, kindness, and wisdom. And somewhere in the quiet of the forest, a small bond had begun, strong enough to carry into the days to come. The morning sun rose slowly over the forest, casting golden light across Kale's small hut. The storm from the previous night had passed completely, leaving the air fresh and filled with birdsong. Kale stepped outside, stretching and breathing deeply. The huntresses had already awakened, moving quietly around the hut, inspecting the plants and observing the forest. Kale felt their presence like a calm weight, watchful yet not threatening. Lyra approached him first, her steps careful and light. She held a small leaf in her hand, examining it as she spoke. "You understand this place," she said softly. "You know it in ways we cannot." Kale smiled, handing her a small notebook filled with sketches. "I pay attention," he said simply. "I watch, I listen, I learn. That is how I survive here and how I know the forest." The other huntresses moved closer, curious about the notebook and the tiny notes Kale had made. He explained the plants, the small creatures, and the ways the forest changed with the seasons. The huntresses asked questions not to test him this time, but because they truly wanted to understand. Kale realized that the bond between them had grown stronger. They were no longer strangers. They were learners, and he was a teacher in a small but meaningful way. Lyra leaned over his shoulder, pointing at a small drawing. "This plant glows?" she asked. Kale nodded. "Yes, only at night. It uses the light to attract small insects, and the insects help it grow. It is delicate but smart in its own way." Lyra's eyes shone with admiration. "You notice things others do not. That is rare among humans." Kale laughed softly. "I am small but I try to see clearly. That is enough." As the morning went on, Kale noticed that the huntresses were relaxing more. They moved without caution, spoke softly to each other, and even laughed quietly at small things he said. Lyra stayed closest to him, her attention constant yet gentle. Kale realized that her whispered words from the first night, "I saw him first," were not about ownership but about recognition. She had noticed him before anyone else had, and that simple acknowledgement carried respect and curiosity. The day passed with shared tasks. Kale showed the huntresses how he collected water from the small streams, how he cared for the tiny animals that lived nearby, and how he prepared his simple meals. They watched carefully, sometimes asking questions, sometimes just observing. Kale explained everything patiently, realizing that understanding was the most important gift he could offer. At one point, a small bird landed near the hut, injured and unable to fly. Kale gently picked it up and showed it to the huntresses. Lyra leaned close. "You save even this small creature?" she asked, voice soft. Kale nodded. "Every life matters. It is easy to ignore the small and weak, but they are part of the world too. They deserve care." The huntresses looked at him silently, each moved in her own way. Lyra whispered almost to herself, I saw him first, and this time Kale understood the depth of her words. She had seen his heart, his respect for life, and it mattered. The sun climbed higher, warming the forest. Kale suggested they explore the nearby ridge where rare plants grew. The huntresses agreed, moving with grace through the trees. Kale led them carefully, pointing out small details, showing how each plant lived in harmony with its environment. The huntresses followed, learning more with each step, but also beginning to appreciate his gentle guidance. During the walk, Kale realized that he was teaching without force. The huntresses respected him not because he was stronger, but because he had patience, understanding, and a calm mind. Lyra asked about the stars in the sky, curious how he had learned about the planets in the forest. Kale explained, using simple words, how observation could reveal truths about life and nature. Lyra listened, fascinated. When they returned to the hut, the forest was quiet and the evening was soft. The huntresses settled around the small table, sharing food and conversation. Kale noticed that they no longer seemed like strangers. They had come seeking shelter, but they stayed because they wanted to understand him, and in turn they had shared themselves. Lyra smiled softly at him, her eyes warm. "You are different from what I expected," she said. "We expected strength, skill, perhaps cleverness. But what we found is respect, patience, and care. That is rarer than any weapon." Kale felt a quiet pride. Not of power but of being seen clearly. He realized that humans could be small in a galaxy full of strong beings, yet remarkable through their heart, intelligence, and kindness. The huntresses had learned from him, but he had also learned from them. Their patience, skill, and curiosity reminded him that strength came in many forms. As night fell, the huntresses prepared to rest. Kale lit a small lamp, its glow filling the hut with warmth. Lyra approached him once more, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You have shown us what it means to care without fear, to teach without pride, and to live fully even alone," she said. "I saw you first, but it is not mine to claim. It is yours to share." Kale smiled quietly, understanding. Recognition, respect, and understanding mattered more than possession. That night, as the forest hummed softly around them, Kale felt a deep calm. The huntresses were no longer strangers, and the whispered words of Lyra reminded him that being seen, truly seen, could make a human extraordinary. They had come seeking shelter, but they stayed because they had found someone remarkable, a human who lived simply yet with wisdom, care, and courage. And as the hut settled into quiet, Kale understood that the connection he had formed with these alien hunters would last. Humans were small in the galaxy, but through understanding, respect, and patience, they could shine brightly, even among beings far stronger and faster than themselves. Lyra's soft whisper lingered in his heart. "I saw him first," and Kale knew it meant more than words. It meant acknowledgement, trust, and a beginning of something remarkable. The next morning, the forest was quiet and bright. Sunlight filtered through the tall trees, sparkling on the wet leaves. Kale moved around his hut, preparing for the day as he always did, but today felt different. The huntresses were ready to leave. Their armor gleamed softly in the morning light, and their movements were calm and precise. Kale watched them, feeling a mix of sadness and pride. They had come seeking shelter, but now it was time for them to continue their journey. Lyra approached Kale first. Her eyes, bright and curious, met his. "I wish we could stay longer," she said softly. Kale smiled, understanding. "You have your paths and I have mine. But I am glad we met. You taught me more than you know, and I hope I have done the same for you." Lyra nodded. "You have," she said. "You have shown us what humans can be, careful, strong in mind, patient, and wise. That is rare." The other huntresses gathered quietly, standing in a line near the edge of the forest. They had watched the interactions between Kale and Lyra, and Kale could see respect in their eyes. They had come as strangers, possibly thinking of humans as small and weak, but they were leaving with understanding. Kale realized that his simple ways, his patience, and his care had made a lasting impression. Even beings so powerful could see value in the quiet strength of a human. Lyra stepped forward again, placing a small hand on Kale's shoulder. "I will remember this place," she said. "I will remember you. You are different. And that difference matters." Kale felt warmth in his chest. Her words were soft, yet heavy with meaning. "I will remember you too," he replied. "And I will keep learning, watching, and caring. That is all I can do." The huntresses turned toward the forest, moving silently and gracefully. Kale watched as they disappeared into the trees, their forms fading among the branches and sunlight. Lyra lingered for a moment longer, looking back at him. Her soft smile and the gentle glint in her eyes made Kale feel a strange sense of connection. she whispered again, barely audible, "I saw him first." This time Kale understood fully. It was not about claiming or ownership. It was recognition, respect, and acknowledgement of someone who had lived well and wisely, even in solitude. As the last of the huntresses vanished, Kale closed the door of his hut and leaned against it. The forest was quiet once more, but it did not feel empty. He felt a presence, a memory of the huntresses' voices, their curiosity and their respect. Kale understood something important. Humans could be small in the galaxy, yet extraordinary through their actions, their heart, and their mind. The huntresses had seen that, and he had seen it in them as well. He went about his daily routines, but everything felt different. Each plant seemed brighter, each creature more alive, and each sound of the forest more vivid. The connection he had formed with the huntresses had left a mark on him. He felt stronger, not through force or skill but through understanding and experience. Kale realized that humans could leave impressions far beyond their size or strength, simply by living with care and attention. Days passed, and Kale continued his studies and routines, but he often looked toward the forest, wondering about the huntresses and the distant lands they traveled. He imagined Lyra exploring new places, seeing new creatures and remembering him as he remembered her. The thought brought a quiet joy. Humans might be alone sometimes, but connections, true connections, could stretch across distances and species. One evening as the sun set, Kale sat outside his hut, watching the sky turn gold and red. He felt a calm sense of hope. The huntresses had shown him that respect and understanding could be mutual, even between very different beings. And he had shown them that humans, though seemingly small, could be remarkable. It was a thought that made him smile quietly to himself. Kale whispered softly to the empty forest, "I hope we meet again." He did not know if the huntresses would return, but he believed that some bonds were stronger than distance or time. The memory of Lyra's soft voice, her whispered words, and the respect in her eyes stayed with him. It reminded him that humans had a place in the galaxy, not through weapons or power but through patience, kindness, and understanding. As night fell, the forest was filled with the sounds of life, the rustle of leaves, the calls of distant creatures, and the gentle whisper of wind. Kale felt a quiet satisfaction. The huntresses had come seeking shelter, but they had left with something far more valuable: understanding, respect, and a shared experience that transcended species. And Kale had gained the same, proof that humans could be extraordinary in ways that mattered most. Before closing his eyes for the night, Kale looked toward the stars, scattered across the dark sky like tiny lights of hope. Somewhere among those stars, Lyra and her companions were traveling, perhaps thinking of him as he thought of them. And in that thought, Kale found a promise, not a promise of possession but a promise of connection, of recognition, and of shared respect. He knew, as the wind whispered through the trees, that humans could shine, quietly but powerfully, even in a galaxy full of stronger, faster, and taller beings. The forest and the hut were silent now, but Kale felt alive in a new way. He had been seen, truly seen, and that sight had made all the difference. And somewhere, across the forest and the stars beyond, a soft whisper lingered in his mind, "I saw him first." It was a simple phrase, yet it carried everything. A beginning, a bond, and the promise that humans could be extraordinary even when no one expected it.